At 21, I ended up catching 21 years in prison. It's not something that I'm proud of, and it's been a long time since that happened to me. It took me many years to come around to the point where I wanted to speak about it with anybody, but I believe that it's a story worth telling because there's a redemption arc to it. It's not the end of your life. It doesn't have to be. It could be, but the choices that you make after that moment, really every moment leading to the point in your life where you say, I'm going to take charge of this. I'm no longer going to allow circumstances, addictions, vices, etc., bad habits control my life. I'm going to take control of it no matter where it's gotten me to, but I'm going to pick myself up from this point and move forward. So at 21, I ended up getting locked up for a string of armed robberies, handgun charges, everything that goes along with that. There's a lot of charges, and long story short, the judge sentenced me to 21 years when I went to court. Now, they tried to scare me by stacking the deck with the charges as much as they possibly could. And it worked. I mean, they definitely scared me, but they didn't get the result that they were looking for. I had ended up destroying my car. I totaled it, so therefore I'm breaking law with someone else at this point, and we were riding around doing some dumb things, robbing people to fuel the drug addictions that we both had. The police wanted me to testify against another individual, and they said, if you do so, we'll make sure that you get the minimum amount of time. I told them, put me back on the block, and don't ever come at me without a lawyer again. So at that point, I was now in their sights, which it wasn't so much then. They were trying to leverage me to get to another individual. I told them I wasn't going to do it. So they put me back on the block, and at that point, I started getting new charges every single week. Every single week, they would bring me a new charge. It was almost expected, and it became a bit comical at one point to me because I'm like, dude, you're just dumping buckets of water in the ocean now. So my bond had gotten up to $250,000 or something. I was like, man, this is crazy. Then it just kept going up when they continued to bring these charges in. It got up to the point where it was a little bit over $750,000. It was like $750,000. And then finally the judge was just like, I'm revoking your bond. And I'm like, dude, I'm not bailing out anyway. I'm not going anywhere. No one's bailing me out for this. And I don't blame them. I was a hot mess. 21 years old. I was ripping and running. And I had a lot of guilt. I had a lot of guilt on my hands. Like there was things that I had done. The way that they explained it in the courtroom wasn't quite how it went down. People rolled over on me so they could get a shorter amount of time. That bothered me because they really painted me to like be this bloodthirsty psycho who just like, it was not cool. I'm not going to get into all the details, but it was like, yeah, we're driving down the road and they pointed at me and they're like, hey, he was like, just pulls this gun out of nowhere. I was like, pull over, I need cash. And I'm just like, bro, that is so crazy. That is absolutely not how these things went down. But it's neither here nor there. I was involved. I shouldn't have been involved. I've paid my debt to society. I've been home for 14 years now. It's been a long time. I've been home for a long time now. That life is behind me. I think I've had like one speeding ticket since then, and that is it. I work. I stay out of trouble. I don't bother anybody. But back then, I was bothering people. So I didn't like the way it was portrayed in court. I definitely did not like that. I didn't like the way that I was characterized because I'm like, in actuality, I remember saying to the individual and individuals involved, I was like, hey, what are you talking about? They're like, oh yeah, let's go rob this place. And I'm like, let's not. I'm like, what are you doing? You need to go work. You need to go find a job. This is not a job. And I ended up getting talked into doing some stuff I didn't want to do. I did it. I was involved. I'm not innocent of a lot of the things that they said, just pretty much how they said it. So I wasn't this bloodthirsty maniac, but still, I was very involved to the point where I call it 21 years. So as they're bringing these charges week to week, after I told them I was not going to work with them, I said, put me back on the block. Don't ever come at me without a lawyer again. And they did, and they never came at me again except to bring me charge papers to scare me. I mean, some of them were kind of far-fetched. Even in one set of charging documents, it said that a black male with cornrows robbed the place. And I'm like, you're charging me with this? Seriously? So it was to stack the deck, make me fearful, try to corner me and squeeze me into cutting a deal or a bargain with the state. So I knew what they were doing. I said, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut, and we're going to figure this thing out. So after I got past $750,000 bond, the judge was like, listen, I'm just revoking your bond. And I was kind of like, cool, this is a joke at this point. We were joking at the jail, like, hey, what's it going to get up to? We're going to have a pool on how high it gets. To get the $750,000 of a bond, you have to have a lot of charges. I don't have the exact number, but I remember at one point it was something crazy. It was like 139 felony charges that the state charged me with to scare the pants off of me. And it worked a bit. I mean, it scared me. It definitely did. I was like, man, this is no joke. Not to include misdemeanor charges, etc. It got to the point with the amount of charges and the severity of them that I was facing 840 years in prison. Now, I remember talking to my mother on the phone and having to tell her, I'm calling from the jail phone, I said, this is crazy. I'm looking at 840 years. Well, she starts to get upset. I mean, she's crying on the phone. I knew I had to do something. I said, Mom, it's okay. No one's going to serve that kind of time. I can make parole in 400. And we had a good laugh about it. She actually chuckled and was like, yeah, it is kind of ridiculous. I was like, they're not going to give me 400 years to do. I mean, it's just crazy. This stuff, a lot of it's going to get tossed out. And it did. But what happened was, to avoid a prolonged courtroom experience, which I probably would have lost, I told my lawyer, I said to my lawyer, I was like, listen, man, if you can get everything thrown together and get it so they don't completely hammer me, I'll plead guilty. I know I got to do some time. Let's try to go down that road. He goes, okay. At one point, he had told me, he goes, if they catch you on one of these charges, you're looking at doing 80 years. They're going to give you 80 years because of the way that you did not play ball. And if you make them take it to court and they get you on one thing, they're going to use that for every single charge you're trying to get you with, and they're going to try to give you 80 years. I said, okay, let's put it all together, get it all consolidated, and I'll plead guilty, and hopefully, I'm hoping like 10 years or something, be out, and maybe like 5, and that was my hope. I'm very optimistic. I'm like, let's 80 sounds terrible. 80 sucks. I want something better than that. He said, okay. So I went back and forth and came to some sort of compromise. They said, all right, here's the plea deal. If you plead to these armed robbery charges and handgun charges, what they're going to do is put you in between a certain amount of time, like a minimum and a maximum for the plea deal. So mine was 12 to 27 years. It could have been anywhere in that. And I was like, whoa. The 27 scared me. 12, didn't sound fun, but it sounded much better than, 27 years. And I was like, can we get like more of an estimate in that anywhere? And he was like, no, it's kind of an open-ended thing. That's the best they're going to do. And again, knowing that they're stacking the deck against me, and if anything were to happen, I've got, co-defendants that are willing to testify and say all this stuff to save their own skin. So I was like, all right, well, we got to take the deal. And I took the deal, went to court. I remember that day, the judge was like, I'm giving you 20 years, 12 suspended for the first charge of, armed robbery, first count. So I'm like, okay, I'm doing the math in my head. I'm in circuit court. I'm like, okay, so that's 8 years, 12 suspended. He goes, and then to run consecutive, another 8 years for a count of armed robbery. And I'm just like, oh man. So I'm up to 16. I'm like, well, okay. If we stop there, it'll be okay. And it's happening quickly. So I'm trying to do the math. I'm listening to everything that's going on. I'm trying to keep my composure. And then he goes, and another 8 years. And I'm like, holy crap. And he goes, to run concurrent. Consecutive and concurrent are, that's how they'll give you time sometimes. So if you get, for example, if they say we're giving you 10 years and we're going to give you 5 years to run concurrent with it, that means the 10 will swallow up the 5. They'll run together. So the higher of the numbers will be the one that you run with. So in that instance, I had the 8 and the 8 and the 12 suspended. So the 12's on the back end. So I had 16, and then they added another 8 and said to run concurrent. So I was like, oh, okay. So I'm still at 16. That's good. And then he said, and 5 years for a handgun charge, using a handgun in the commission of a violent felony. It's no joke. It's not a good charge to have. To run consecutive. So I'm like, okay, I think I heard him right. This man just gave me 21 years. And then that was it. And then he just looked at me in this stern look. He was very sending a message. And I get it. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time kind of thing. So I do get it. It's not like they should have just slapped me on the wrist and sent me out the door with a voucher to Dairy Queen and go get a hot dog in a blizzard. It was like, you're going to prison, bud. You're definitely going away. So I'm doing the math. I get to 21. I look at the judge and I said, man, wow. Like, I didn't say a word. And he just looked at me with this very stern, angry look. Like, he was very upset with me. And I get it. I do. Like, I totally own this. And I just remember him saying, he said something along the lines of, do you have anything to say? And I just gotten my time, and my head's spinning. I'm standing there. I'm like, I'm 21. This man just gave me 21 years. The only thing I could say to him, I just looked at him. I said, thank you, Your Honor. And I walked away and sat down. And you could hear the silence in the courtroom. It was tense. It was thick. You could cut the atmosphere with a knife, probably with a dull spoon. It would have been so easy to just cut through that atmosphere, the thickness in it. And I went and I sat down in the corner. I just sat over there and I was like, I just got 21 years. Well, this sucks. What am I going to do? What am I going to do now? And then I realized that the only thing I could do was day at a time. So at that point, it was day at a time. I had been in the county jail for not quite a year waiting for court. So if anything, I was glad to be going to prison. I know that sounds very strange, but I was glad to be getting out of the county jail and going to prison, where you have a lot more freedom, you have a lot more privilege, you have a lot more opportunity for like just going to the library. You're going to have a better library, so you got more to read. You could have TVs in your cell. I don't know how it is anymore. This was back in 2003 that I got locked up, and now it's 2024. So if I would have done every single day of that time, I would just be coming home this year. Thankfully, I didn't have to. And I'm going to cover all this in another video, but I wanted to talk about catching 21 at 21, what that means, what it entails, and what you got to look out for. When you're a kid and you think you're tough and you think you're bad, and judge lays you down like that hard, that fierce, you realize you're not as tough as you think you are. And now you're going to a gladiator academy, most likely. And that's kind of what happened. So I'm sitting in the corner of the courtroom. It's quiet. There's tension. The court clerk is getting the paperwork together to bring me my copies of everything that just happened, all my paperwork, the things that I'll take with me to prison, also in case, for my purposes, if I get on the tier and somebody's like, hey, are you a rapist? And I'm like, no, here's my paperwork. It's like, okay, all right, you're good. So in a weird way, I actually had cool charges, doing air quotes here, cool charges, which, I guess. But you don't want to have skin charges, rapist stuff, messing with kids, those kind of things. That's not what you want. You're going to have a real hard time. So at least I didn't have that. Going into prison, I had a big number, but it was charges I wasn't too concerned with people being like, oh, you were robbing places? Oh, we're going to teach you a lesson. Most people in there are kind of in that same boat, one way, shape, or form. So as I'm sitting in the corner, waiting for the papers to come over, I was like the second to last case on the docket that day. Another guy came up after me, and it was like some kind of drunk driving thing, I think, or suspended license. Like I said, my head's elsewhere. My mind is spinning at this point. I don't know what to make of it all. I don't know what to say or do. I'm just shell-shocked, honestly. That's the best word for it. And I think he ended up getting something like a couple weekends in jail because he was working and yakety smackety, blah, blah, blah. The judge was like, I'm going to give you, it's like 4 weekends in jail or something. And he goes, yes, sir. It's okay, sir. And there was a comment made. I don't even remember who said it, but they were like, yeah, after that last guy, I'm not too worried about the 4 weekends in jail. And it was, the whole room was just like, whoa, this was like, the big crime of the day here, the big sentence of the day. Nobody was getting smashed off like that. I live on the eastern shore of Maryland. It's kind of a quiet place. It's not too bad. It's a little wild. But it's not Baltimore City where people are getting hammered all the time. That's one of the murder capitals of the United States. Baltimore and D.C. Like, it's rough stuff. So I'm actually going to be in prison with most of those guys. And so this is the start of that journey to head off to prison, catching 21 years at 21 years old. And I was fortunate enough to be able to say goodbye to my family right there. And they took me out of the courtroom, and transportation's always fun. But they were watching me extra hard. Like, I guess they thought I was going to try to escape or something. Or I don't know. I'm not Jason Bourne. I'm going to pick a lock and get out and disarm some police and flee successfully and be on the lam and go to Mexico or whatever. But, in situations like that, even like the transport officers are a little bit more wary. They're more hesitant to let their guard down because people react pretty badly in these kinds of circumstances. I get it. I do. So I get taken back to the jail. I go in. I had some buddies in there. They all knew that, it was sentencing day for me. And like, man, how'd you do? Did you, get on the low end? And I was just looking at him. And I said 21. They're like, what? So news shot around the county jail real quick. Everyone knew that I caught 21. And, but like I said, this wasn't common. There wasn't a lot of people getting bigger numbers like that, like 10 years maybe here and there, some 15-year guys. But once you hit 20 and above, it was kind of, it was not common. We'll just leave it at that. So word got around the jail, and all my buddies are coming up to me like, man, hey, bro, I'm sorry, just trying to console me a little bit in the best way they can. Hey, man, you good? I'm just like, hey, yeah, I'm all right. And they're like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah. Like, you're not going to hang it up or anything, which is just a term for unaliving yourself. I said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm just going to do it day at a time. So it was nearly a year from the time I got arrested to the time that I was sentenced. Not quite, a little bit less than. And then to wait for transport to come get you and take you to DOC, which is it's diagnostic. up in Baltimore can take a couple of weeks. And it was about 3 weeks. So I was a little bit nervous for that because I'm like, okay, now I have to go to prison. Now I have to get in the big boy van and go up to Baltimore and get processed. And when I go through there, they're going to send me to the prison that I'm going to be doing most of my time at, if not all of it. So diagnostic was basically just a hub in the state for everybody coming from the county jail that had to go to prison. Excuse me. They would assess you and send you to the place that they saw fit. And that's on a number of different criteria. It could be you have co-defendants in a certain jail, or you have enemies in other jails, and they usually make sure that you don't end up in the same institution. So I had asked to go to one specific institution. I wanted to go to Roxbury. I wanted to go to Roxbury because they had trade schools, and I was like, I want to get there. If I can do some of these trade schools, I'll stay busy, and then at least I'm doing something a little bit more productive with my time. And a lot of guys are like, Roxbury's not bad. It's a clean jail. It's not really, really old. It was one of the newer places, but it was a medium level 2. And that was where I wanted to go. And I asked them if I could go to Roxbury. But they decided to send me all the way out to Cumberland, an institution called WCI, Western Correctional Institution. And I had to go to diagnostic first, obviously. Went through the initial phases there. Oh, this was funny. I'd never been to diagnostic, so I'm in Baltimore. I get in, and we're doing like the basic stuff, like blood tests, make sure you don't have HIV. They're making sure that you're not carrying any kind of illnesses with you, like tuberculosis. They're checking everybody for that. You spend a lot of time just being processed in bullpens, and just it's hurry up and wait, and it's real slow, real boring time. There's nothing to do. It's just an empty dungeon, and you just get cycled through. Well, the first night, the place was so packed, they had us all going to the gym. So I'm like, I got my 21 years. I'm trying to, get my sea legs, I guess you could say. And I'm avoiding certain people. I'm making nice with other people, forming some bonds and friendships with a couple of guys that were cool. And so they said, you go into the gym. So we all go in the gym. We got our little mat, and we're just throwing it on the floor. And I'm making my little spot. Guard pops in, and he hollered my name. And I look over, and I'm like, what's up? He's like, what are you doing in here? I'm like, you put me here. What are you talking about? He's like, man, you got to go to the 7th floor. I was like, what? He goes, man, get your stuff. Come on. I said, all right. So I grabbed my stuff up, and I was like, all right, later, fellas. The group that I was in there with. Grabbed my things. I head that way. And he goes, what are you doing in here? I said, man, y'all put me in the gym. He's like, nah, man, you got to go to the 7th floor. I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, listen, anybody with more than 20 years, you get a bunk. You get a room the first night. I'm like, oh, okay. So I guess this was kind of like a weird silver lining. I got a bunk the first night. So 7th floor was the top floor of the building, and each floor actually had 2 levels to it. So it was really like the 14th floor because I was on the top level of the tier, and I was on the top bunk. And a really interesting thing about it, it was like I said, in Baltimore City. I think it was on like Madison, and the windows were like a giant 4x8. Imagine a piece of plywood that you put down on the floor of your house, or maybe like a sheet of drywall even. Well, they're bigger than that, but a piece of 4x8 glass, and that was the wall. So where the bunks were stacked against the wall, there was a sheet of glass. Literally, like you would wake up and you would be looking right out the window of the city. it was something else. I had heard about it, and I didn't know what to expect, but when I saw it, I couldn't believe it. So I would wake up, and I would literally be able to like look down like 14 floors to the street below. It was wild. I mean, it was really wild stuff. But being in there was really slow time. It was not fun. It was not something that, it's not somewhere you want to be long term. There's a couple guys that would do that. Like they could opt to stay there and work as, like a DOC worker. And you would be there for like 6 months. They put you on like a working tier or a working assignment. You would go around, you'd feed up in the jails or in the cells. You bring food around, that kind of thing. Or you'd come around and do like little basic sanitation, like cleaning up, etc. I mean, the place it was run by inmate labor. The guards were guards, but the inmates did everything else. So those guys, if they would stay there for 6 months, a lot of them were guys from Baltimore. They'd be able to get visits from their family. It was a little bit easier for them. They would go ahead, they would stay there for 6 months, and then they would get their choice of jail to go to. So you had to qualify for it, but it was not a place you wanted to be. There was no laundry service. I mean, you ate in your cells. You would come out like an hour every other day. They would come around, you might get a shower every 2 to 3 days. So with no laundry, no showers, you had to live in the cell, and it wasn't fun. But so I went in, and this is basically my first experience in prison was going to the 7th floor because I had 20 years, and I get a bunk. So I go in, and I mean the fact of the matter in Maryland prisons, as a white guy like me, I'm a minority. Big time. You're a big time minority. It's like 85 to 90%, black. It really is. That's what it is. And there's a small Hispanic population, not much in the state of Maryland. There's a little bit. So it's about 10 to 15%, white guys. So I go in there, and you really got to watch yourself at that point because you are the minority. You can't say or do anything out of line. You got to know where you're at. And so I go in, and my first bunk buddy, great guy, awesome, older black dude from Baltimore. Man, all we did was play cards, and we talked and joked, and he was awesome. This guy was fantastic. And I ended up running into him later in the system, and every time I saw him, I'm like, yo, what's up, B? And, he was always in different housing units, but good dude. We would just run pinochle all day long. We'd play head-up pinochle, and that's how we'd pass our time, But he showed me some of the ropes, which was cool. And I was like, yeah, man, it's my first time really doing time. So, any kind of advice you might want to throw out for me. He's like, yeah, all right. And older guys that are cool, they like to tell you, as long as you're respectful, and it's really it. If you're respectful to them, they're going to want to help you out. Pretty much most guys will. There's certain people, they're just not going to mess with you, period, no matter what. Just stay away from him. But B was cool. I'm not going to use his whole name because I don't want to do that. Good guy. For prison standards, because there's some really, really, really bad characters in there, but he was all right. So he showed me a couple things. He was telling me about some stuff, and I had him as a bunk buddy for 2 weeks, and I was there for about 3. He showed me some tricks I didn't know about. He was like, man, you're not going to be able to do laundry, so you're going to have to do it in the cell. I said, all right. I was like, so what's good? What do we do? Where do we hang the lines up and all this? And he goes, all right, I got a line already. We can hang it up, hang up our clothes. This is the thing that I thought he was messing with me at first. He was like, we do laundry in the toilet. I laughed at him. I was like, okay, all right, you're tricking me, right? You're punking the kid. I get it, whatever. I'm the young guy. You want to have a laugh. And he's like, no, dude, that's where we wash our clothes. If you want to wash them. And I was like, whoa, what? So I watched him do it the first time. We would get this soap. It was, if you're locked up and you remember this, you know what I'm talking about. The Lisa soap. This stuff was strong. I mean, it was real strong. So we made sure that the toilets were super duper clean. Like, it's just prison, man. You got to get used to some certain things in there that you would never do on the streets. So we cleaned the toilet out really, really well. We cleaned it up. We had like a dedicated rag for that and everything. So we made sure it was super clean, and then we would wash our clothes in it. And it had like such a powerful suction. It was like a jet engine that when you would flush, it was like the rinse cycle. So you would just get to scrubbing. You would scrub your drawers, you'd scrub your socks, because if not, then you're just going to stink and be foul and funky. And most cell buddies aren't going to put up with that either. Unless you and another Viking get in the same cell, you're going to have to be cleanly to at least a certain degree, or you're going to have some problems. It's going to cause contention. So after I saw him do it, I was like, okay, he's not joking. And that was a very rude awakening to prison. I wanted my drawers and my socks clean, so I would do laundry in the toilet at times. I mean, you're in the cell 24 hours a day for the most part, and you got to find some stuff to do. So it was definitely a culture shock, but it was fortunate that I had met that particular guy and not some wild knucklehead. Like, he was able to teach me some things I had no clue about. He was able to show me a bit of the ropes. He even told me about Cumberland, because he was like, yeah, I've been there before. I wasn't there that long, but it's a real clean jail. It's chill. You'll probably like it as far as prison goes, because there's some real wild spots. I mean, it's not like a tame institution by any means, but it's not like some of the spots in Jessup, which are, I mean, I still get intimidated thinking about going to those spots at that time. If I would have gone to House of Corrections or the House of Corrections Annex, it would have been a whole different prison experience for me. So he was telling me about what to expect, what not to expect. You know, the 21 years, he put me on with a little bit of stuff about that. He goes, usually when the judge will give you an odd numbered year, that is an indication to the parole board that they don't want you to make parole without having to be said. And I was like, oh, I didn't know about that. And I don't know how true it is, but that seems to be at least the lore in prison. If it's an odd number, like if they give you 17 or 19 or 23 or something, in my case 21, that was a nod to the parole board, don't give this guy parole. I was like, wow, okay. That's good to know. And so he taught me a lot. And when he left, I was like, man, now I got to worry about getting another bunk buddy in here. And I remember, this was funny, this dude's name, well, I can't use his real name because I don't even know it, but he went by 6'9", and this dude, he was about 6'9". Huge, giant black guy. I mean, enormous. And when he came in, I was like, oh, man, I hope this dude's cool. And he popped in, he had to duck his head up under the door, and I just remember joking with him. I was like, well, you're a big fella, ain't you? And he just laughed, and we got along too. So I was real fortunate in that aspect as well. There's a lot of knuckleheads in there. He taught me a lot about jail. He told me a lot of good advice about going in, you know, your first time, what to expect, what not to expect. Tell me about some of the horror stories from when he had done time in New York back in the day, you know, when it was more wide open. And we would just play pinochle all day long. We would just play head up pinochle. And, you know, so that was cool. He was another good bunk buddy to have. Gave me a big old hug when I left. I was just like, right on. I was like, he's cool. And he was like, oh, man, you know how to do laundry and all that too? He's like, all right, cool. You ain't no foul dude. And I was like, nah, man. I'm trying to be as clean as I can. You know, we got to live together. So little things like that disrespect to avoid is what these guys taught me. And it helped a lot going to where I was going, because I was a newbie as far as going to prison. But catching the 21 years at 21 was definitely a jolt. It was a shock. I didn't get to go to the prison I wanted to, but I ended up going to the prison that I needed to be at, apparently, because I met some really great guys in there that I'm still friends with to this day. Very good friends of mine. not everybody that's in there is a complete bloodthirsty animal. A lot of us just made bad mistakes. It wasn't like, oops, I robbed a place, but it was a bad decision. And usually it's not because like, I just want to go be some menace to society. There's always an underlying reason. For me, it was fueling a unchained drug addiction, man. I was just chasing this stuff, chasing it, going after it hardcore. And it landed me where I need to be. So ended up getting that 21, and I hate to say it, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life because it saved my life. I probably would have died had I not gone to prison. And the things that I've learned in there, given me a head up and a leg up in so many situational things in life that I'm like, it's wild. It's very wild, the things that you learn in there that can, not necessarily will, but can make you a better person. And I'm fortunate that I got the time that I did because it woke me up. It snapped me to my senses. And like I said, it just saved my life. And another interesting thing about diagnostic is when you get your time, you learn about how good time works. So the way that they do it in Maryland, at least back then, what they would do is they would give you 2 months off per year if you had a violent charge, 4 months off per year if you had a non-violent charge. So the way that works, I had 21 years, I had violent charges, so that's 42 months, that's 3.5 years. So that would take me down to 17.5 years would be my mandatory date. So they give you an automatic amount of time that they shave off when you first come in, and that is your mandatory release date. Your maximum would be day for day. For example, if I had served my maximum amount of time, I would just be coming home this year. If I would have served my mandatory, I would have done 17.5. But you can also still go in, stay out of trouble, and work. And in that aspect, you can knock your time down even more. I was able to do that. I only served 7.5, and it wasn't because of good time. I'm going to get to that in another video. I went back to court several years later. And it's, like I said, it's a video for another time, but this is the catching 21 at 21, looking at 840 years, $750,000 in bond until they revoked it, sending me up through the system, being one of those hard head cases where they put you right on the top floor immediately, and it's like, boy, you messed up, and you better get yourself together. So I definitely took every step that I could to get myself together after that, but it was definitely a long, hard road, and I started it out at Cumberland. I did. That's where I went to, and it was an interesting spot. When I first got there, I thought that 21-year number would be something special, keep me from being hassled or bothered. Like, for some reason, I'm thinking that people are going to look at me and say, oh, he's got 20 years. Let's leave him alone. He must be crazy. I don't know. I don't know what I'm getting into. My very first bunk buddy when I got there had 40 years. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, huh. He said, how much you looking at? I said, 21. And he was like, oh, okay. Come to find out, the average time per inmate in that jail was 22 years. So I thought I had some kind of a number going in, but it wasn't. It was actually below average. There's a ton of lifers. I knew a couple guys that had well over 30 years in, a couple guys that had more than 40 years in. There's a couple guys floating around that have 50 plus years in that they had done. There's one guy, biker, he was in there, and he was like, how much you got to do, boy? And I was like, first of all, he's like, no, I don't mean it like that. I'm just, how much time you got to do, youngin? And I said, they gave me 21. He goes, I got your whole bit in. I was like, oh, really? I mean, this guy already done 25 years. So it was a different kind of place. Yeah. So that's basically the beginning of my prison journey. That's going from county jail, getting sentenced, through diagnostic, sent off to the prison I'm going to, and then I'm there. So if you like this video or this podcast, depending if you're listening or watching, be sure to like and subscribe it. I'm going to have some more prison content coming out much more regularly now that I am able to do so. And I look forward to sharing some more of this stuff, not in the hopes of talking about prison as in some kind of glorified experience, but more of a learning curve to help a lot of people too. So with that said, I always like to say this, it's very important. The wise man doesn't get himself into what the smart man has to get himself out of. Think about that. Just think about it. And if you enjoyed the content, thanks for sticking around this long. I've got plenty more videos, 7.5 years worth of stuff to talk about. And I'm telling you, some of these stories, they're pretty good. They really are. Like I'd tell them to people at work a lot and family and friends, and they're like, dude, you have to do a channel. You have to put a YouTube channel out there. You got to write a book. So I'm starting with all that stuff, and I'm trying to put it out now. But thank you for sticking around to the end. And go ahead, like I said, like and subscribe for more.